Good evening, everyone. Today, I want to discuss something crucial for understanding how power operates in the contemporary world and how it is used to shape politics, culture, and even the fundamental values of society. Let's analyze the discourse of Olavo de Carvalho, who provides a critical view of power dynamics, addressing the revolutionary mentality, the judiciary's role, the cultural hegemony of the left, and the importance of the intellectual foundations that support these movements. For Olavo, everything begins with the revolutionary mentality. He describes this mentality as an obsession with power, especially among leftist movements, which see all the world's problems as stemming from their lack of control. The priority of these movements, he argues, is not to solve problems or build something concrete, but to seize and maintain power at all costs. Olavo uses the example of Karl Marx, the German philosopher and author of Das Kapital, who dedicated his work to criticizing capitalism, but never explained how socialism would be implemented. For him, this shows that practice and governance are not priorities. Power is. He also mentions the fall of João Goulart in 1964, the former Brazilian president overthrown by a military coup, which the left interpreted as an absolute disaster, as if nothing could be worse than losing control. From this analysis, Olavo introduces what he calls a new power strategy, using the judiciary as a tool of control. He explains that this approach is even more dangerous because it does not require large-scale mobilizations, complex structures, or long-term efforts. It only requires control over a small group of individuals, such as Supreme Court justices. He points out that this strategy was theorized in the United States by thinkers like John Rawls and Ronald Dworkin, but is now being applied in Brazil, where the Supreme Federal Court, STF, Supremo Tribunal Federal, Brazil's highest court, makes decisions that disregard existing laws and public opinion. He uses the example of abortion, claiming that even though the majority of Brazilians oppose legalization, the STF could approve it unilaterally. For him, this illustrates how the judiciary can concentrate power that surpasses even the legislative and executive branches. Olavo connects this issue to the cultural hegemony of the left, which he believes dominated the Brazilian landscape until the 1990s. He argues that the left not only controlled politics but also culture, academia, media, and social movements. This hegemony, he says, was supported by an intellectual authority attributed to figures like Michel Foucault, a French philosopher known for his theories on power and social institutions, Jacques Derrida, a French philosopher associated with deconstructionism, and Jean-Paul Sartre, a French existentialist philosopher. He criticizes these thinkers, claiming that their prestige was more based on cultural influence than on real, intellectual merit. For Olavo, dismantling this intellectual foundation is essential to weakening the left, as it functions as a kind of wall that protects and legitimizes its movements. From here, Olavo directs his criticism toward Ronald Dworkin, an American legal philosopher known for his work on law and moral principles, whom he sees as one of the main proponents of the idea that judges can interpret laws according to broader principles such as democratic and secular values. For Olavo, this view is extremely dangerous because it turns judges into absolute authorities above written laws and popular will. He also connects this approach to Derrida's deconstructionism, which argues that texts have no fixed meaning and can be interpreted in multiple ways. According to him, this creates a scenario where laws lose their objectivity and judges impose their own views under the guise of following higher principles. Another important point in Olavo's criticism of Dworkin relates to his views on religion and values. In the book Religion Without God, Dworkin argues that values such as human dignity and respect for life can exist independently of religious foundations. Olavo rejects this idea, arguing that many of the values we consider universal today, such as respect for life and equality, were introduced and solidified by Christianity. He cites historical examples such as infanticide in ancient Rome, where unwanted children were often abandoned or killed, and slavery to show how these practices were transformed by Christianity. He also highlights contributions such as the creation of hospitals, schools, and universal literacy, stating that ignoring this connection disregards history. To counter what he sees as abuses of judicial power, Olavo proposes two main strategies. The first is the intellectual discrediting of judges. He believes that by exposing the weaknesses of the theorists who inspire these judges, like Dworkin, it is possible to undermine their self-confidence and weaken their authority. The second strategy is the approval of laws that limit judicial power. He mentions Bill 4754, a proposed Brazilian law to punish judicial overreach, as an example of how to combat this concentration of power. He uses an interesting analogy to explain this. Judges are like children who rely on an older sibling for protection. If that older sibling, represented by the theorists legitimizing their actions, is exposed as weak or incompetent, the judges will lose their confidence and security. Olavo concludes his speech with an urgent warning. He believes that if this concentration of power in the judiciary is not addressed, Brazil risks seeing all the conservative achievements of recent years reversed with a single decision or stroke of the pen. For him, the fight must begin in the intellectual sphere, unmasking the idols that sustain this strategy and neutralizing their influence. He emphasizes that combining intellectual action with legislative changes is essential to preserving the values and institutions he sees as fundamental to society. In summary, Olavo's speech is both a sharp critique of the current scenario and a call to action. He analyzes how power is exercised, points out the risks of its concentration in the judiciary, and proposes solutions that combine intellectual strategy and institutional reform. It is a deep reflection on the forces shaping our time and an invitation to critically consider the direction we want for the future.